Yeah, well, as we start, Jemima, I'd like to start with the Psalm 23 passage that we had, the video, the nice Green Hills one. So just while to give Jemima a chance to have that ready, today we're looking at Mark chapter 6. But the primary theme that stands out to me in this, the theme that captures the whole chapter really, is Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And so we're going to look at that, but we wanted to engage with Psalm 23 as well. Thanks, Jemima.
The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and loving kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the Lord's house forever.
Did you pick up that psalm okay? Did the internet work all right? Just give me a nod if it did. No, that's an unresponsive audience. Iffy. Yep. Okay. Well, if this doesn't work, can someone interrupt me and I'll switch to mobile tethering? Burning water period. That's just as dangerous. Okay. We'll see if this works. I actually wonder if Zoom's misbehaving a bit today because a few of us have had internet troubles. So we'll see how we go. I feel like I need to wake up to that psalm every morning. That would be a peaceful start to the day. That would be like, coming in. I love watching that one. So we're going to look through Mark chapter 6. So if you've got your Bible, turn to it. I'm also going to share it on the screen so you can watch it, but I'll be in control of that one. Sometimes it's nice to have your own passage in front of you. So we're just going to read through a bit of Mark chapter 6. What's already happened here is that the 12 disciples have been sent out. They have been casting out demons and healing and preaching, and they have come back together. But because of all that's been going on, things are really hotting up and a crowd starts to build. And so here we go as they come back. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." I'm just going to pause for a second because I can't see you guys. Can someone just tell me if I'm coming through okay? You'll have to say it verbally because I can't see
Yes.
you. Good. Okay, great. Okay, here we go then. Can see you guys having trouble getting in. Okay, verse 32. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all, and they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten were 5,000. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost, and they cried out because they saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, and they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. Over. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout the whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, and countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let him touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. Mark is so readable. It's so great just to read through that. Just one second. And so this morning I want to go through a few things. I think it's nice to be able to get our minds into the right place, but then I want to start engaging the heart as well. Someone chat to me if I'm not coming through, and I'll just assume that I am. Yep. Okay, what I'd like to ask you, in your chat, if you can access your keyboard, without looking through your Bibles, can you tell me some of the miracles that the disciples have already experienced? So if you chat these in, don't look at your Bibles. Can you tell me some of the miracles they've already experienced? You're allowed to unmute your mic and just say it too. Jesus turned water into wine. Correct, Poppy? Yeah, water into wine. What else? Excellent. So from Tim Hinks, Jairus' daughter was raised from the dead. Can you believe that? So just the chapter before, Jairus' daughter is raised from the dead. Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. Great. Keep a couple coming. There's a paralytic man who's healed, who was let through the roof. Correct. That's before this as well. Just a couple more. And then I'm going to just run through a list. Okay, I'm going to go for it. So I want you to not just roll through this list as words. I'd really love you to be able to try and picture it as much as you can. I really want you to feel what the disciples are feeling as they come to Mark chapter 6. I don't want you to just roll through the list. Jesus turned water into wine at Capernaum, like you said. There was a miraculous catch of fish, so that the guys who'd been fishing all night didn't catch a thing, and then this whole boatload of fish comes in one pool. Jesus calms the storm is before this. So Jesus gets in a boat, goes to sleep, they cross the lake, and there's a massive storm. They all think they're drowning, and Jesus calms the storm. That's already happened. There's the freeing of Legion, who was a guy who had 1,000 demons in him. And so there was setting this guy, this notorious, crazy person living in a cemetery with chains, who was set free. Jairus' daughter was raised from the dead. A woman touched his cloak and her persistent 12-year bleeding stopped. The healing of a paralyzed man. So this is the background to this chapter. I often find that we read parts of the Bible in segments and we forget to relate it to a longer story. And so the disciples are carrying this. The crowd has experienced a whole bunch of this as well. And so they're coming in and they're crowding around Jesus because it's an amazing place. Thousands of people are coming to hear him and to see him. And so Jesus realizes that he sent the 12 out. They've all been doing miraculous things and preaching. And I don't know if you've experienced that kind of energy that's required to run that sort of a show, a thing, a tour. But they would have come back exhausted already from being out with this 12. Now, Jesus says to him, as he sends out the 12, just in the same chapter, but earlier on, Jesus says in Mark 6, verse 8, he gives them instructions and he sends out the disciples. Take nothing on the journey except a staff. Don't take any bread, no bag, and no money in your belts. Okay, so here's the disciples, the 12, who've gone out, they've done all this work, and they come back, and Jesus has said, don't bring any money, don't bring any stuff, don't bring any food. So they've got nothing, and they end up, Jesus then says, let's go out to a quiet, remote place. And so they head off in their boat, and they land on shore in this quiet place with nothing, and the crowd turns up. And then towards the end of the day, the disciples start saying, Jesus, there's a big crowd here, and it's getting late and haven't eaten. So there's this concern for them. And at this time, Capernaum and Bethesda are between 2,000 and 3,000 people in population. So they're quite a bit smaller than Wheatley. They didn't have a big Asda. If Jesus sent the people off to these neighboring villages, there's no way that these villages would have been set up to feed 10,000 people, and it was late already. And so it was interesting. And so Jesus says, you give them something to eat, which to me sounds a bit unfair when he's already said, don't carry any money or food with you. But I think what's going on here is he's trying to teach the disciples, you're not limited by your physical world if you're in line with the Spirit, if you're following God. You're not limited to this physicality. And so stop thinking that way, where we can now move to a new dimension. We can now call on this amazing thing of God. Now the feeding of the 5,000, that probably would have cost them like 15 grand's worth of food to go out and buy, half a year's wages. But here it's just incredible watching them. I don't know if you can picture being in the crowd, because I think there's one beautiful piece of symbolism here. They're in a remote, quiet place in the middle of nowhere. There's this big crowd of people who haven't got what they need to eat. And then it's a little bit like the mass exodus, where this bread from heaven comes and they are fed by God himself. I wonder if you can imagine what it would mean to sit on this. It says it's green grass, so it's probably autumn, late autumn. It's coming up towards Passover time. They're actually going to very soon remember this time of the feeding and the time in the desert. And here they are with God, a bit like manna from heaven, God miraculously feeding them. How much would you have liked to have tasted some of that bread and the fish? Just being fed by God himself physically, which is incredible. I wonder if you can picture yourself there. But I want to come back to the disciples. I feel like this is one of those times. I'm going to share my screen again. This is one of those times when the disciples actually, I think they deserve some kudos or some credit in this one. I've just got to hurry up for a second. Okay. The disciples on that day, things were pretty hard for them. So they were exhausted. Jesus says, come on, let's go to a quiet place. Now, if my boss, my leader said, let's go to a quiet place, and we get there and there's this massive crowd again, and you're like, oh, here we go again. I'm already exhausted. I'm already finished. And here we go again. So they turn up and it is crazy busy. The disciples had just come back from a busy time preaching, healing, casting out demons. Jesus took them away to a solitary place, but then the large crowd gathers around them. And then there's a full day of teaching. So I want you to put yourself in the body of one of these disciples and how they're going. And then Jesus does this amazing thing, this miracle of feeding 5,000 men plus everyone else who was there. Can you imagine watching, but also the logistics of that and being part of that miracle? I imagine that they would be exhausted, both mentally and physically at this stage. And then Jesus says to them, they're in Bethesda. So if you can see my screen, Bethesda's on the right side. I don't know if you can read it, but it's on the right side of the north of the Sea of Galilee. They were in a remote place near Bethesda. They weren't far away from it at all. Luke actually says they were at Bethesda, but that's probably because it was the nearest landmark that he could mention, but they were in a remote place. And so Jesus says to the disciples, go back to Bethesda. So they hop in their boat. It's a little hop and a step away to get to Bethesda. Somehow, through the night, they get pushed out into the lake and they can't fight the wind. They're exhausted and they're rowing flat out and they're going backwards. We would have had a yellow or an amber weather warning if they had the BBC app. And so you can see here that Jesus stays away to pray, stays up on the hill. And it says by the third watch, so by 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., Jesus looks out and sees them in the middle of the lake struggling. And so then Jesus walks out on the lake and he walks by them and he tells them, guys, don't be afraid. They've already seen him calm the storm once, and here he comes again. He hops in the boat and the wind stops. And just to show you how difficult the night row had been, they end up pulling in at Gennesaret, which is the opposite side of the lake. So a couple of hours of solid rowing to get back here as well. So they are exhausted after a night of rowing. Jesus walks on the water. Again, these miraculous signs must take emotional energy to experience and to be part of. And then they land at Gennesaret, the opposite side of the lake to which they planned. And I think getting there, they land, and then people run. It says they run to the local villages to get everyone to come back to them. So I'm going to stop sharing again. But you can see the disciples, what they went through. This is one day in the life of a disciple, and I think they deserve some credit for this one. We often give them a bit of a hard time. Here, I think they're incredible, what they went through. But can you imagine the excitement? They've been fed by God miraculously. They've seen Jesus walking on the water. They've experienced Jairus' daughter being raised from the dead and a leper being healed. It's a crazy time. And so that's what this chapter takes us through. But the bit that I'd like to focus on is right at the start. It's the bit on the Good Shepherd. Jesus says in Mark 6, verse 34, when Jesus landed, he landed in that remote place at the start. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. This phrase of sheep without a shepherd is an interesting one. I did some research. I haven't heard anyone teach on it, so I might be wrong. But I think the first person that mentions this idea, this concept of a shepherd and its sheep is King David in Psalm 23. If you look in your Bible, before that time chronologically, being a shepherd of people isn't really mentioned. You'll read it in 1 Kings and 1 Chronicles, but that was written 500 years later. And again, it was about King David shepherding. And so this is a new concept, Psalm 23. This is a new image of God that David is inspired to write. So he writes Psalm 23 about God being the good shepherd. But what I'd like to read at the moment, I think the thing that Mark's possibly pointing to is Ezekiel chapter 34. This is a passage, and in Jesus' teaching, we see this pattern quite often of just, he feels protective of his people, of these people, but those who should be shepherding him are not shepherding, but feeding off the lambs instead of feeding them. And so I want to read a bit of Ezekiel 34 with you. So I'll share that on the screen as well. So Ezekiel 34. Let's have a read of this. I want you to picture Jesus would have read this passage many, many times. They would have read it in the synagogues. And I want you to capture this piece because I think Jesus refers to this quite often. Okay, it's a bit harsh, so let's read it a bit abruptly then. But Ezekiel 34. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, you clothe yourself with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. Let me read verse 4 again. You've not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You've not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became like food for the wild animals. Jump to verse 7. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock, therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I'm against the shepherds, and I will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost. I will bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. But the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. And then jump to verse 30. Then they will know that I, the Lord their God, am with them, and that they, the Israelites, are my people, declares the sovereign Lord. You are my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, and I am your God, declares the sovereign Lord. And this morning I'd like to focus in a bit on this passage, on this theme. If we jump back to verse 15, 16, I wonder where you fit into this passage. I can imagine that quite often Jesus, he's often talking about shepherds and sheep. He's often talking about the shepherds who are supposed to be looking after the sheep, not looking after them. And then this is what Jesus promises. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the Lord, the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. I wonder if you fit in any of those words. Yeah. And then I'd like to read just one more passage, which is John chapter 10. This is a few months later on from Mark chapter 6. Jesus says this. Jesus, the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. He's referring back to Ezekiel 34. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. When the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it, then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. But I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen, and I think he's referring to us there. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. So reading through these passages, I can feel the sense of anger and frustration as Jesus talks about those who should be shepherding them. These people turn up and he says, these people are without a shepherd. Who's helping them? Who's guiding them? Who's looking for the lost and the injured and the hopeless, the despairing? Who's the shepherd who's caring for these sheep? Where are they? And then Jesus has compassion on them. And so how does this relate to us? His statements are timeless. We are his sheep. And we, I think we are left with the choice. And this is probably my main thought for today. I can choose to follow the shepherd. I can choose to trust him. I can choose to allow him to hear his voice and to follow him. Or I can try and sort things out on my own. And I'm often haunted by the thought of back in Noah's time, right back at the start of the Bible, the sin that the people had is each person was following their own way. That was the sin that was credited against them, that they all did their own thing, what was right in their own eyes. And so for us, what does it mean to listen to our shepherd's voice and to follow him, to know his voice and to be his? Um, I know that I constantly have this choice of tuning into self and trying to look after myself and do my own way, or I have the choice to tune into my shepherd, to God, and to be his. And the thing I'd like to encourage us with this morning is, can we each day, each moment, can we continue to retune our internal radio away from self and noise that's just going on and actually tune into God? That's why this Psalm 23 is so special for us. I think it gives us a reminder of coming back to our shepherd who is looking after us and caring for us and guiding us. An interesting thing, I think an interesting thing is, as I look at the Psalm 23 that I showed you at first, it's so peaceful, and there's a drone going over green mountainsides, and there's this beautiful building in a forest, and it looks like the perfect place. It looks like heaven already to me. And you're watching it, and I'm like, this is so nice being here. The person who wrote Psalm 23, that would have been a million miles from where they were writing from. The person who wrote Psalm 23 lived in exile. His life was threatened. He ran away because the king was trying to kill him. He hid in a cave. He was suffering from, like, on many occasions, near death experiences and persecution. And so he's writing not from this beautiful, glorious, natural oasis, but he's writing from a place of need and desperation. And Psalm 23 was one of St. Patrick's favourite psalms as well. He grew up spiritually on the side of a hill as a shepherd slave, and took great comfort from the psalms that he read, that David wrote as well. This place of coming from persecution. So I'm going to show you a short video, which it's a 1-minute video of Psalm 23, but from people who suffered persecution. Just because I like to contrast, I'm going to sneeze, sorry, just because I want to have the contrast of Psalm 23 in different contexts. Now, for us in the Western world, our suffering is no less significant than those who suffer through persecution. We go through different kinds of things that will cause us great difficulty or harm. So we'll be going through things like relationship breakdown, or through failure, or through financial hardship, or we'll be going through things that can make life, if you don't have a shepherd, feel incredibly difficult. You can struggle through. And so in our culture, I think we face quite a different kind of persecution. It's not persecution, but a different kind of hardship. So I wonder, when the psalmist says that even though I walk through the darkest of valleys, I wonder what that is for you. It's probably not someone trying to throw a spear at you, but instead it will be, and we've all lived long enough to have several significant times when we can remember the hardships that we faced and walked with God and he shepherded us through those times. And so as we read this psalm, I'd love us to be able to contextualize it to our own lives. How does this relate to me? So I'm going to play two videos. One is Psalm 23 from persecuted kids in Syria and Iraq and in the Middle East. And then I'd like to just play the song Psalm 23, someone singing it, so that you can have time to just let the Holy Spirit speak to you. When we come back after these 2 videos, I'd love us to have just a time of, Al will lead us just through a time of sharing. So if there's something that stands out to you or something that you would like to say, we'd love you to unmute your mic and say it. You can raise your hand or you can just call it out, but we'd love you to be reflecting, how do I engage with this psalm? How do I engage with the Good Shepherd of Jesus who cares for his flock and has compassion on them and leads them? So if you'll just humor me for a moment while I get this next song up.
My name is Ahmed Aouni.
My name is Jana Hajjef.
I'm Emil Azar from Aleppo, Syria.
My name is Kikaro Luay.
Joseph.
Natalie Nassar.
Peter Isa.
Lita Qawi.
Sylvia Gamal.
Wasim from Iraq.
Fadi Ghanem, I'm from Jordan.
الرب رعية فلا يعوزني شيء.
في مراعي خضر يربضني إلى مياه الراحة يوردني.
He refreshes my soul.
He guides me along the right path. For his name's sake.
حتى إذا اجتزت وادي ظلال الموت.
I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
عصاك وعكازك هما يعزيانني.
ترتب قدامي مائدة تجاه مضايقي.
مسحت بالدهن رأسي كأسي ريا.
إنما خير ورحمة يتبعاني كل أيام حياتي.
And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
We are the church.
And just finally, I'll share. This is a moment just to stop and reflect, and just let this song soak in. So if you're happy to, tell us what you think after this song.
My shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. my shepherd, I shall not want.
Thanks, Al. Over to you.
Hopefully you've had some time to reflect as that psalm's been read and sung. Just an encouragement that when we come together, we all come to contribute as well as to receive. And so whatever you have been reflecting on, there's a very good chance that it will bless us if you share it. So I want to encourage you just to unmute and share what it is that struck you, something that's blessed you from it, a challenge, a comfort perhaps. If you really feel unable to do so and would like to share, then there is always the chat, but we'd rather hear your voice because it's more personal. So over to you. Share what God has been putting on your heart as you've been listening.
It's what a picture of David's relationship with God. That's how, that's what David thought of when he thought about his relationship with God. That the Lord was his shepherd and that he could trust him that much. And maybe that's how our relationship with God should look too.
I was praying and listening to God earlier, and I painted. I try and paint in my journal quite often, and I painted that, and it just said, "Learn to hear me above the din." And I had a picture of sitting on a beach beside Jesus and just chatting with him, and I was asking God, well, how do I learn to hear you above the din? When the waves are really loud and the wind is really loud, how do I hear you? And I felt like he said, actually, it's in learning to hear me in the quiet place that you then recognize my voice in the loud place. So there's something of a call to be listening to him in the quiet place, because then we get to know his voice better and we can hear him when the clamor and the storms are loud.
And I think I was just struck, thinking back of my life and experience, that often we only know that he's been with us when we look back on the difficult times. We don't always realize it at the time.
Yeah, I was reflecting on that. That is who God is. That's his nature. But how often do we allow ourselves to experience it? Because we could choose to live lives where we battle against whatever it is in our own strength, and we could, not drink from the cup, and we could not spend time being guided by God. But he is who he is, and do we allow ourselves to experience him as the shepherd?
I've spent a bit of time on farms back in Australia, including sheep farms, and I just really noticed the difference. If you try and isolate a sheep, it's just panicked and in a frenzy, and it doesn't know what it's like. It is a crazy time. Cattle are pretty much the same. I'm more used to cattle, and I just noticed in me this utter difference. This move from if I feel like I'm just on my own and I'm forgetting about my shepherd, I am in this crazed state of survival. It's panicked, but just the difference of as I center on God as my shepherd, and he cares for me and he provided for me, he's moved by compassion for me. There's such a different place. Like it's amazing, my internal world, as I realize, God's got me. Yeah, this amazing contrast. So I'm going to try and wake up with one of those Psalm 23s every day this week. Yeah.
I think the other thing that strikes me is that as the shepherd, God's compassion, not just for his disciples, but for these lost people in the the gospel story, these thousands of people on the hillside just in need that can't be met humanly, but God has compassion as their shepherd, and his disciples are part of meeting that need, but it's his care and compassion for the people that reaches out and meets their great need.
Poppy is just a bit nervous, but wanted to say that when she hears about the valley of the shadow of death, although she doesn't have any experience of that, it just reminds her that nothing else can worry her. Surely if God is with you through that, then you don't have to be scared of anything. The reflection I've had, there's a friend who said to me once, God desires to be our guide and not our map. And what you see in the psalm is not God laying out, here's where we're going to go for the next 20 years, and don't worry, you know, everything's going to be fine, but rather, I'm with you, and when things are difficult, I'm not necessarily going to fix everything, but I'm still with you. And it's like Dan was saying, it's the presence of the shepherd that comforts us, not necessarily the things that he might do to make things easier. So I take away from it just a reminder to walk close with God, and for closeness with God to be the comfort and the goal.